Turn me around, I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
Over the weekend, a group of activists arrived at the steps of the Capitol building demanding change, but they did not just show up there. They walked 700 miles from Atlanta, Georgia in 50 days. Dubbed the Democracy 911 Walk, the goal is to raise awareness about the corruption in our political system and demand a government that actually represents the people.
Joining us to discuss this journey, the significance of this trek, is Ronaldo Pearson, Director of External Affairs for Represent Us. Ronaldo, great to see you.
Great, thank you.
First of all, how are those feet doing?
Yeah.
My goodness, they are sore. They are sore, especially my ankles.
Yeah. Okay, so you're here to talk about presidential candidates, possibly meet with some of the teams. What are you demanding of these presidential candidates exactly?
The ask is simple, and that is to heed this emergency that we're seeing with regard to our democratic republic. Unprecedented assault on our democracy with regard to voter suppression, these voter purges, to the tune of millions now, partisan gerrymandering, the corrupting influence of big money in politics, and now foreign powers hacking what's left of our elections. So we're asking that our presidential candidates actually heed this emergency and pledge to fix democracy first.
So what does that specifically mean?
Well, this particular campaign says that we want them to protect our right to vote. That's number one, protect our right to vote. Number two is make our elections secure and competitive. And number three, end political corruption.
Well, again, what does ending political corruption mean? Do you have any specific plans, demands, legislation?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have the House, and you talk about Democracy Spring,
sure,
right? So we were a part of that protest march from Philadelphia to D.C. and ended in D.C. by pushing Congress to do what it did ultimately, in the House at least, H.R. 1, the For the People Act. So we're asked the Senate to pass a bipartisan alternative to that. So key to that piece of legislation is not just the voter protection pieces, but also public financing of elections. So whether that looks like democracy vouchers or some.
Yeah, what do you think of Andrew Yang's Democracy Dollars proposal?
It's a good proposal. It's a good proposal, and he is one of those 5 or 6 candidates who have pledged to fix democracy first.
Yeah.
And of course, the biggest momentum we've gotten recently was just from Elizabeth Warren this past week, where she's adopted our anti-corruption frame and said that she would fix corruption first if elected.
How do you think that we got to this place? I mean, in my personal view, I think Donald Trump has obviously taken everything. It's more brazen, it's out in the open, the type of corruption that he's engaged in. But corruption within our political system is not new. So how do you think we got to this place where the country would essentially tolerate somebody like Donald Trump?
Yeah, I would argue that, you know, these folks are symptoms of a system, and particularly one of the chief motivators for me doing this walk, 700 miles, I'm the only one who did the whole walk, the entire duration, is when I see the Washington Post report just this May that almost 16 million Americans have been removed or purged from the rolls. We should be alarmed. That was the headline. And of course, it's based on this report from the Brennan Center that gives the details of that.
Sure.
But how did this happen? It's in the wake of the Supreme Court gutting the 2013, in 2013, gutting the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And that was the signature or landmark achievement of the civil rights movement. What does that mean for my generation? It means that we're the first generation of Americans to witness America become less democratic. So when these presidential candidates or even pundits don't talk about the fact that 2016 was the first presidential election without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act, they do so at the risk of dismissing or even disrespecting, I would argue, the blood-drenched sacrifice of the civil rights movement, because we're seeing that in the wake of this gutting of the Voting Rights Act, voter suppression off the scales, purging. We haven't seen purging to the tune of millions ever before. This is unprecedented.
I'm not entirely familiar with this, but what is the impetus for the rolls? I mean, I assume there has to be a reason that this is being allowed to happen.
Yeah, one of the major reasons is because we don't have the same type of what was called pre-clearance that the Voting Rights Act mandated. So there's not the same type of oversight through the Department of Justice, whereas whenever a jurisdiction that was covered by the Voting Rights Act had to seek pre-clearance from the Department of Justice before they would change a voting law to make sure it didn't have a disparate impact on communities of color. That's one of the key reasons. Absolutely.
Okay.
So talk to us about just like what the journey was like for you. What surprised you? What did you learn about America? Just what was the experience like over those 50 days? You said you're the only one who actually made the whole trip.
Yes, yes. So folks, joined on and off throughout the whole time. And of course, I had my team to make sure my road team to make sure I didn't fall out.
You gotta have your people behind you.
That's
for
right.
Sure.
Make sure I was hydrated and everything. But it was quite the journey. I've got to note the rich irony of dialing 911 in our broken democracy and ending corruption before it ends us, but at the same time, forgetting the number of times how many folks actually dialed 911 on me for walking while black. So that's one aspect of it, but beyond those police pullovers, there were way more pedestrian pullovers who actually wanted to offer a ride wherever I was going, and then when I told them, well, that kind of would defeat the purpose of what
doing a thing here.
Yeah. And then I told them why I was doing it. First I said, well, I'm walking from Atlanta to DC, and they're like, what? But when I told them why, to end corruption, political corruption before it ends us, and tie that to this new normal or more mass shootings than there are in days of a year at this point, or the new existential deadline of less than 12 years before it's game over on global warming, they get it. Like, power to you, God bless you, and they offer
When
water.
you said, did you get any negative responses when you said that?
No, I can't think of one negative response.
Even if somebody disagrees with you, if you're walking 700 miles,
I
respect the game.
Okay, you're committed. We see it.
In fact, one guy even, two guys. One guy gave me a back scratcher for the days that I get lonely, right?
That's nice.
Yeah, and then another guy, when he heard what we were doing, he was asking if he could give us a ride, and I told him it's a long distance walk. He then got in his ATV, caught up with us later down the road, and gave us bottles of water.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Love to hear that.
A couple different tales, and I choose to take the positive one away from this.
Absolutely.
Ronaldo, thank you so much for joining
Thanks,
us.
Ronaldo.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for doing the work.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.